Hello. One thing that is absolutely certain in war is that there will be bloodshed. And that is going to be our main topic tonight, the promise of blood.
And with that, welcome to this week's episode of the 800's. I am your co-host, Alex, and you just heard from my fellow co-host, Adam. And why don't we just go right from there into our plugs for the week?
Sure thing. First off, thanks to the man behind the scenes, Alan.
Yeah,
he
thanks
keeps
for
us
catching
alive. He keeps us
Jeez.
alive in our audio streaming, even when conditions aren't ideal. So thanks, Alan, for always having our back.
And sorry about that mix-up.
So if you joined us for our pre-show, you heard Fearless First by Incompetech. We use Incompetech for all of our projects because they're amazing. Go check them out at incompetech.filmmusic.io. Also, if you look below your video screen, you'll see a few links. I want to direct you to one specific link, the YouTube link. We have a YouTube channel where you can find all of our past 800's videos, as well as our podcast, Roll with Advantage, and some other cool videos doing some book reviews and other cool random stuff. So, check that out. And if you're an audiobook fan like I am, check out Audible today. Go to dmstable.com/audible for a 30-day free trial. That'd be a long free trial. Here's a couple of years of free trials. 1 month, 30 days free trial of Audible, dmstable.com/audible. And that's we do Patreon for book voting. If you want to tell us what to read next, check out Patreon. We are currently in our free-for-all mode of book voting, so you do not have to give us money to vote for the next book. You just have to, be cool and let us know what book you want us to read. Our current vote will end tonight at 9:15. So make sure you get to our Patreon and vote today.
Yeah, we'd love to know what you want us to read. So this week on the 800's, we will be discussing the first book of the Powder Mage trilogy, Promise of Blood, by Brian McClellan, Dewey Decimal Designation 810.6. Jumping right into the action, Promise of Blood begins with a coup. The monarchy of the Kingdom of Adro is taken prisoner, and their royal cabal of sorcerers known as the Privileged are slaughtered in the name of the people. Upon their deaths, the Privileged all speak the same mysterious phrase: "You can't break Krezimir's promise." What does it mean? With the help of his subordinates and an act investigator named Adamat, Field Marshal Tamas must find out, all while securing his nation against royalist and hostile nations.
Very cool, very cool. Oh yeah, just for the comment section here, our connection is not the greatest today, so if we seem choppy, it's probably on our end and not your end. So try and bear with us. We'll talk extra slow. So I'm just kidding. We're going to talk normal. But if this is your first time joining us tonight, we essentially how this works is Alex and I will pitch a topic or question that we want to talk about. We'll talk about it amongst ourselves and give you guys a quick moment to think about what you want to say about our topic or question and type that up in chat. If you have your own topic or question that you want to talk about, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll be sure to drop you a line and discuss the cool aspects of the book that you want to discuss as well.
And just our bi-weekly reminder that this is not intended to be a show specifically for kids. So while we will try not to rely too much on swearing and stuff, it might happen, and we do cover adult topics and things. So at your own discretion, allow kids to watch. And we are also trying to build a supportive and fun community for people who like to share hobbies and interests, specifically for us in the 800's that's reading. And we don't allow people to be dicks, so please be nice or fuck right off.
It's always funny. And also, shout out to Nezra for the suggestion for Promise of Blood. Thank you, Nez. The the book obviously made it to the 800s, so good suggestion.
Yeah, we love having suggestions make it to the reading list from our viewers.
And with that, let's get right into the conversation. What was your first impression?
Yeah, so a lot of this felt like, what if the French Revolution had magic users and, living gods? Like, there were so many parallels there that I kind of, it was hard for me not to, like, imagine, like, that specific scenario, which I kind of liked, because for high fantasy, that's a pretty unique scenario to be in. Like, most high fantasy goes for either modern or futuristic, or they might go in, or obviously the most common being like your medieval knights and chivalry era type of high fantasy. So seeing it in the context of the French Revolution era was pretty interesting. Oh, and of course there's steampunk, but even that's a couple hundred years after, so, or 800 years or so after, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely felt the French Revolution aspect, especially with that scene with the guillotine and lining the nobles up. That was straight up out of French Revolution. So for me, this story felt like book 2, and it felt like the author expected you to have read book 1 already. So it was a little jarring for me to start up. But I think a lot of that was just because there was just a ton of information smacking you in the face right away, with powder mages and all the other magic users, and underlaying all of the political, exhaustion, I guess is a good word for it. So yeah, I definitely think it was very suck you in-y, but a lot of info to swallow right off the bat.
Yeah, McClellan definitely threw us readers in the deep end, because I completely agree. He expected us to just take in all this information all at once, and I think, I can't tell if that was intentional or not, because he starts off with a high stress situation, and the only way to parallel that high stress is to make you take in a lot of information, just like somebody who's in a high stress situation like that would have to do. But at the same time, I found it kind of difficult to care about these political machinations, and I think he was relying a bit heavily on historical precedent for caring about the strife of the people and stuff, and caring about, where these characters were at that very critical point that happens at the very beginning of the book, without any real introduction to them. So yeah, I kind of agree with Stormreed. It was a slow start. It was a slow but intense start to the book, which was a little weird, like very jarring to kind of read it that way,
Yeah. And just a little shout out to Storm too. He kind of helped me out with remembering names for this one, because wow, were these names unique. He suggested that I try and equate them to real names in our world, and that really helped. Like let's see, an example. Taniel was Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
Adamat was just Adam, although that kind of threw it off when the god Adam came in. So. But still, it definitely helped. Honestly, all those weird names of places and people just right off the bat was pretty jarring. But having that little trick really helped.
Well, and I imagine that it was a bit trickier. Like, I did a combination of paper reading and listening to the audiobook, and I had some trouble with the names as well. So, I totally understand that mix up, especially once I did start reading them as opposed to listening to them. If you don't have the names right there in front of you, it can be especially hard. Looks like Elpac Phantom says the book didn't really ever grab them felt like it was lacking in world building, which is something I really like that they really like to have. What are your thoughts on that, Adam?
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with certain things. Like earlier, you mentioned the strife of the people. To riff off of that and Elpac's comment, um, it was never really brought up again. Like you didn't ever see the the rebels do anything about the strife of people. Um, it just felt like a setup point to get us to where the book started. Um, there was, for me, there was a lot of stuff in the world, and not a lot of it was explored. I mean, honestly, this book was pretty big already, so I'm not sure how McClellan could have better built on that, but um, yeah, hit you in the face, tons of information, not a lot of it explored was my feeling.
Well, I am kind of somewhere in the middle in between. Like I do feel like there was some world building in there, but it was relied a lot on like exposition to get there rather than actually building. So it felt more like a photograph than the actual like 3D like thing, like the photo of a story rather than the story when it came to world building specifically, because there's a lot of information there, especially if you follow the pictures a thousand words analogy. But because there's definitely a lot there had to be to understand how these uh, powder mages, Nacts, and
Privilege.
the privileged all work together in this world that also has a burgeoning technology sector in it, where you're talking just pre-industrial revolution kind of era. And I felt like that could have been explored more, and it would have been nice, and that would have given a bit more depth to the world. So yeah, while there was world building, it did feel a little flat to begin with. So I can see Alpac Phantom's point, and I can see VS Drake's point as well. But for me, it landed somewhere in the middle. Like it could have been done better, or at least had more depth to it. But the parts that did had depth, I really enjoyed. But maybe that just kind of made the parts that didn't a bit more glaringly obvious to me.
I would say a specific reason that I feel the way I feel about the world building is like there wasn't a lot of traveling. It was just cut to scene. I feel like traveling is an author's opportunity to open up the world and let you explore what else is there that isn't in the main focus. Um, but yeah, um, moving on, let's talk about the magic system. Vic brought that up a little bit.
All right. I personally, at first, was a bit confused by it because the different aspects of magic felt so disconnected to me. And it wasn't until they started talking about the else that it really brought it together. I was like, how can these different types of magic exist when they are so completely different from each other and disjointed? Like it almost felt like they didn't belong in the same world until they had that kind of central point to pick from. And that was a little frustrating to begin with, because I was just like, I started building ideas around what that was. And maybe this is my own fault for doing that. But, when I finally got to the point, I was like, oh, there's this thing called the else that they all kind of draw from. And that's how they're all related. And the rest of it is basically just whatever you're born with. And I was like, oh, I thought it would be more than that. I mean, I like it. It wraps things up nicely, which I enjoy. But at the same time, I was just like, well, there goes all my stupid guesses. How'd you feel about it?
I So there's obviously a lot of different magics in the world. I kind of liked how Knacks were just like a catch-all. It's like you're not a wide magic user. You have one specific magic power that you can use, but that magic power can be anything. So that was kind of neat. I really want to know how the first person who was a powder mage figured that out, because sound like you wouldn't know unless you ate gunpowder, and that's not generally a thing one does.
Well, I can understand how somebody might realize, like, because they talk about feeling the powder and feeling like the potential energy there, and I could see that. But you're right. The first person to snort that stuff, like, who thinks of that? Then again, you could say that about a lot of things in real life too. So,
Yeah.
like, who was the first person to figure out that you could snort that and not die?
Yeah. But obviously, we get a pretty broad picture of what the powder mages can do. Um, I liked the conflict between powder mages and privileged. I would have liked to hear a little bit more about what exactly privileged can do. But obviously, that's a perspective thing. It's very much a powder mage perspective book.
Mhm.
I thought it would have been cool if there were other substances people could snort to have magic powers too, because like gunpowder seems like a very specific thing. So it would, I think
Yeah.
it would have been cool if it's like, oh yeah, you snort baby powder and you can talk to a toddler, you know.
I did have that exact same question, is why is it specifically gunpowder? And I have my own personal theory that because it, in the brief talk about how privileged work, it talks about how each finger is linked to each of the elements. And the best I can figure is gunpowder is effectively two elements combined to create potential for one of the two elements. So basically what they're sensing is the potential of one of those elements, i.e. fire, combustion.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I could think of is like what other, but by that same token though, like you could probably sniff, snort sand and should be able to control earth, right?
Yeah.
Let's get into some of how the chat's feeling about this,
Yeah.
though, because I like that they're so active.
VS Drake, who decided to eat mushrooms. Yeah, that's a good analogy to gunpowder there. But yeah, the Elts, just like Alex was saying, and VS Drake, it's very cool how everybody has something to do with the Elts. The Elts was definitely the main build of Magic. Thanks for the cautionary tale there, DM's table. Do not snort baby powder. DM's table does not endorse the snorting or consumption of baby powder in any way, shape, or form. We have to say this for legal reasons. I'm just kidding.
Although we probably do if we were to look it up.
Stormreed, I definitely think the third eye is a sense and not a physical eye. They talk about turning it on and off a lot in the book.
Yeah, and not opening and shutting it, but turning it on and off like a switch rather than like an eye. Yes, and please don't snort. Yeah, don't snort stuff in general. It's probably not for the best unless you need antihistamines and they're prescribed. I do like that Stormy mentioned that the different characters had different powers even within, like, they're different, like not just the knacks, but even the powder mages had like variants of it. While they were rare, it was cool to see that it wasn't such a strict system that it had to be just this one thing. There is some bend to it, and it kind of gives you an idea of how that magic actually works. Is it has to draw from something, and some people are just more attuned to it than others. Same thing with the way people use the third eye, actually. I think Adamat, he struggles to use it, but when he uses it really well. And then who is the other one who uses their third eye and they just have no problem with it whatsoever? They're like, well, why are you struggling with this? I can't remember which character that was.
Well, I mean, pretty much all the powder mages, right? All the powder mages, all the privileged were like, yeah, it's just a thing.
Yeah, but I did like seeing the variants, and like you said earlier, with the Nacts being able, like, to have anything potentially be a Nact power, like they kind of thought Adam had, or Mahali, as he's called in the book, had before they realized that he was Adam,
Yeah.
or
And
avoid realizing that he's Adam.
Tamis was just like, oh, he's an act. He's not a god. And at the end, he's a god.
Yeah, I do like
Yeah.
what V.S. Drake brings up. What did you think about the weaknesses specifically of the different magics?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of a cool parallel that like powder mages lived off of powder and privileged couldn't stand the stuff. Bo was the privilege that Taniel was friends with.
Yeah, that's the
He
one.
Yep, he had a lot of the comments about like, oh, I'm gonna be sneezing for a month because you're around and stuff like that. So it was kind of interesting. The gold thing was kind of I didn't follow if there was a logic behind why gold was a weakness for the powder mages. Perhaps you caught on to something there, but
No, I couldn't. And that kind of plays into the whole powder being a weakness thing. Like, I kind of get that you wanted things to counter each other, but why is that so powerful for some and not and a weakness for others? Like, none of that was explained why. It just was. Same way that gold was a weakness for the powder mages. Like, I don't fully understand. Maybe it has its basis in chemistry somewhere that I'm unaware of. Um, but like nothing I can think of comes off the top of my head other than the fact that gold is incredibly stable and gunpowder is very much unstable.
nah.
Like that's about all I could get out of it, and it struck me as a little strange that it had those kinds of rules, and it didn't seem to attach itself to that unifying essence, the else, in any way that I could see, or detach itself, as the case may be.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a little hinky to me. Maybe he goes into it in the fewer in like the next parts of the series, but I that was probably my least favorite part. I liked that there were weaknesses, but I didn't like that there wasn't like a viable reason why that worked. And considering how much went into explaining how the magic works in this book, I thought that was a little bit of a blemish on it for me personally.
Yeah. I will say it was kind of cool how it's like you start out there are powder mages and privileged, and then after a while there's knacks, and then after knacks there's um what was her name, Poe or something, I forget, the lady who went with
Uh,
Taniel everywhere.
Oh, couple or
Yeah,
pull?
Carpole. Um, she had like the voodoo magic, and then there were gods, and oh, and then there were even better than privileged, and it was really cool how things just kept expanding, I think.
Yeah, I did enjoy that element. I like the expanding elements. It's just for me personally, I kind of like them to fit, and this didn't seem like it fit. V.S. Drake apparently disagrees and totally valid that they enjoy that the magic system has rules, but it has mystical elements, which I totally get. I personally thought it didn't fit as well because the author did so much to explain certain parts of it. Um, and when something wasn't explained, there wasn't any part where a character said, "People don't know why this is the way it is." It was just like he the author expected you to just accept it, and you could. I feel better when it's one or the other, but when you try and do both to a reader, it's a little bit difficult for me personally.
Yeah.
Carpool. Yeah, the one who always travels with him. Carpool.
I want to go in the fast lane. Carpool, get over here. um, why does any of the magic work? As Elpac Phantom says. I don't know.
Totally valid counterpoints. It just didn't rub me the right way, and it could, maybe that's just my personal preference. Like, it doesn't all need to be explained. I guess it was just the way in which it was. Some parts were left unexplained, and other parts were explicitly explained in pretty intimate detail. But there wasn't a reason for why some parts were and some parts weren't, other than arguably the stuff dealing with the god sorcerers. That stuff I was fine with leaving as it was, because it was very much explained, like, that's from a bygone era when we forgot a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But like, maybe I just had a realization, and that's why nobody knows why anything works, and I should have accepted that for everything. But I don't know. It just felt a little weird to me, and that's, but totally valid point. If you were able to accept it, I'm glad that you were able to enjoy that aspect of it without having the hang-ups that I apparently do.
Yeah. You want to pitch another topic?
Sure. Why don't we stay kind of on the magic element and get into the parts about the most recently introduced magic users, i.e. the god sorcerers and the Predai. What do you think they actually are? Do you think they're of that world and left elsewhere? Or what are they and how do they work? What are your theories on that?
That's a good question. I think, well, they kind of touched on it a little bit, that the Perdei were from the time when the gods walked the earth, and kind of hinted that, like, they weren't gods themselves, but they were close.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, what I think is they're probably the same thing. Their gods were probably humans at one point, and the Perdei were probably also humans at one point. And similar to privilege and Perdei in current times, you had gods and Perdei in past times. So what essentially, they're just the less powerful form of gods in my mind, because obviously they're practically immortal.
Yeah, so like kind of a god demigod type of analogy, or
Yeah, that's a good way
see,
to put it.
I got almost a sci-fi feel from them, like this extraplanetary thing. Maybe it's because they specifically talk about Kresimir going to explore the universe, but I don't know. I just found it kind of interesting to kind of guess as to whether or not they originated from this world and then left, or if they came from somewhere else to begin with, because it almost feels like they do, and that the else is this kind of underlying force in the universe. Like, we have our four forces, electromagnetic, gravity, strong and weak forces, and the else is just like a fifth force, and anybody in the universe potentially has the ability to tap into that in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like our stream is getting a bit rough again. Yeah, please hang with us as best as you can. We'll try not to power through things too much, so we don't leave you so far behind. But oh yeah, that is right. Via Strike does mention that the Preve lady was introduced fairly early in the book. I don't know if we had the name that early for her specific type of magic user, but she was.
I think it was later that we got the name, but
yeah,
she was there for a while.
Yeah, but it does seem like, I don't know. I'm wondering whether or not the where the Prede got their powers. Was it from the gods and I missed that portion, or was it that they?
I I don't think they ever talked about where it came from.
Yeah, because it almost has that idea of like, these are the people that we taught to have this, lasting connection with the else in a way that nobody else can, because we are the ones who understand it best as the gods or high sorcerers or whatever. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering how much of that, like, I'm curious to know if anybody else out there knows whether or not Brian McClellan has any other books in the same universe that also pull from the else, because that'd be interesting. Because there's a lot here that could go into like kind of like an interstellar series, kind of like the Cosmere from Brandon Sanderson.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be kind of
Kind of riffing off of what Storm's saying. For a clever field marshal, Tamis seems to get in trouble often. Do you think Tamis was an adequate leader, or do you think he just filled an available role?
I think he was an adequate leader, but what I think we're asking is whether or not he was competent enough to be an excellent one.
Yeah.
And I think he had all the abilities to be an excellent one, but he also he talks about his own flaws, which I actually really like. This aspect of the book is that he acknowledges his own flaws and makes people hold him accountable because he knows he's going to mess up. I think he has plenty of foresight. He just is an emotional person, and it gets the best of him sometimes. And he recognizes that in multiple occasions. And what I think he also was just kind of the person who was in the right place to do what needed to be done, at least in his eyes, and the eyes of at least enough people to make a coup happen.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a combination of both. Like, you don't get to a place in like a position that he was in without having a significant amount of competence. But was he the perfect person? Absolutely not. Was he but he was just the person who was there, and he was competent enough to make most of it go right for him. Like, because think about all the attempts at undermining his plan that occurred in just this book. And how many times was it actually undermined? Like, arguably once, when Kresimir was actually, resurrected.
Yeah. I definitely think I don't know. I think he was very much a guy who wanted to be a military leader and did not want to do anything with government.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree. He kind of cast that idea aside. Like, whenever anybody talks about him taking power in any sort of like governing sense, especially like when they try to the royalists try to bribe him, he's just like, no, that's not what I fucking want.
Yeah. I think kind of similar to what Storm said, a lot of the situations he got in trouble with, I think, were due to the complexities of his social position as leader of the government.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously he had the council, but he very much took the front seat of everything. And I think he definitely should have deferred to his counselors a lot more often than he did. That probably would have helped him with the minutia of not screwing up the city.
I mean, it's hard to tell how much planning went into this because of how, we start out in the middle of the action. We don't have any buildup whatsoever.
Yep.
V.S. Drake makes a good point, though, is that he probably rose to his rank because he wasn't emotional until after his wife was executed. And then after he did, that emotionality kind of took over. And that does make sense. So there is that combination of skill that got him there, and the emotionality that probably pushed him over the edge when he might not have otherwise. So that's a good point, V.S. Drake. I agree with what Storm Reed said about it.
Yeah, I really liked the dynamic that Tamis showed emotions. He very clearly loved his son, and cared about his son's future and well-being, which was kind of cool to see in a character who's supposed to be this gruff general who is the baddest of the bad and stuff, So it was neat to see a real person's dynamics inside Tamis. I personally, I really liked his character. I enjoyed envisioning him on a personal level. So
yeah, but he did have his flaws too. I mean, his son Taniel obviously had issues with the way that his life was orchestrated. I mean, if you're going back to that era, that assuming fairly relative parallels between that and French Revolution era, the fact that a lot of his life was planned out by his father is pretty normal, but you're also starting to see that idea of like people wanting to kind of buck the norms. Like his son is just like, why do I have to marry this woman? I'll accept it because that's what my father wants, but I'm kind of relieved that I don't have to go through with it. So he was a loving father, but he was, I do like that they were willing to show imperfections in characters, which was nice. Speaking of imperfections, what were your thoughts on the depiction of gunpowder as effectively a narcotic, like an addictive narcotic?
that was a really good question. I'm happy we're going to talk about that. I thought it was an interesting dynamic to keep powder mages from just dosing all the time. Because obviously if it wasn't an addictive, dangerous substance, then powder mages could just snort it 24/7 and be gods unto themselves. I thought the very serious nature of it being an addictive drug was kind of downplayed during Taniel's brief addiction periods where Carpool would have to like hide his gunpowder from him. I was happy that it was there, but I thought it could have been more dramatized and given a bit more of a serious feel to it.
I thought I kind of agree in some respects, but I thought it was done fairly well, at least fairly accurately, for in particular when you see addiction in people who are high functioning. It's a pretty good depiction of how that sort of addiction works and how people around them will try to mitigate that addiction without taking away something that allows them to be high functioning, especially when it's not understood exactly the full extent of the damage that it can cause. And obviously it's causing damage. I mean, there's a full scene where he snorts too much and his nose starts bleeding. And that's like, so I do think there's potential for that to become dramatized. We'll see how it may play out a bit more in the later books, but it looks like let's see here. Our chat was talking about the Duke hiding that he was privileged. If we want to briefly circle around to that, I actually really like that reveal. I don't understand how he hit it. Kind of makes sense because like you just don't use your powers and you don't wear the glaringly obvious thing that makes you like that's how, I suppose, but like the fact that he was able to.
I guess the question is, the third eye can see magic users. Does it only see magic users that are using magic, or does it see all magic users? In which case, how did he hide it?
Yeah, it's I'm not sure. Like it seemed to kind of imply that anybody who is connected to the else in any way, so not necessarily using the magic, but if you're like interacting with the else, it can be sensed. And some people probably do that innately, but obviously some people can hide it, but we've only seen that downplayed by a god level sorcerer, i.e. Adam slash
the Duke.
Well, Adam is also known as Mihaly. I always forget that name. But anyways, circling back to our previous topic, it looks like we have a bit of a conflicting feelings going on in chat about the drug elements. I'm wondering, for those of you who didn't like the references to the drug use, if there's a reason why, because it's something that I enjoyed because it wasn't too terribly preachy about it, and they gave it I agree with Via Strike. It gave it a kind of a balance. There had to be something cut back, like you said, Adam. Otherwise, they'd just be on it all the time.
Yeah. I guess that would be a good balance question between powder mages and privileged. Is what's the privileged limit to magic use? I don't think
it seems to be energy a little bit. Like they just say that privilege get tired, and that they kind of leave it at that. So obviously pulling at the else takes some kind of internal energy that gets expended. And you can potentially cut yourself off from the else entirely, whether intentionally or accidentally. So that is a potential drawback, but even the drawback comes with its own power.
Yeah. Yeah, V.S. Drake just mentioned the null guy. What were they? Mage breakers? That was kind of an interesting thing. Like, oh, you could be a weak privileged, but then you can turn yourself into this yes, no kind of mage where it's you can either use magic or you can't, and I get to say which. So it's kind of an interesting gimmick.
Yeah, this was a very complex magic system that all derives presumably from one central idea, which I actually appreciated. So it was kind of cool discovering all those little things, and hopefully there's more in the following books that kind of gets to the things that I wasn't sure about, or at least gives me a satisfying nobody knows, and they're not supposed to know, because I didn't feel like there was much of that other than the what they call it, the bleakening.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So why don't you throw out a topic for us? Unless chat has something for us, why don't you?
Well, just really quick. 1 minute warning for the vote. If you guys want to vote on next week, you got a minute to pop over to Patreon and do so.
Everybody can do it.
Yep. Anybody, just check it out. Your vote options are Study in Scarlet, Stormfront, and Then There Were None. So quick, get over there, vote.
Should I start humming the not Jeopardy music for this?
Yeah, let's go off V.S. Drake's comment before I pitch that.
All right.
I loved how Brian did the movement of the story through the characters. Never felt like, no, wait, don't switch the story arc. Do you feel like the story flowed really well? Did you feel cliffhangers, anything like that? What did you think of the character swapping?
I thought it was done pretty well considering the format that Brian McClellan took. I agree it was fairly fluid for the way that he decided to do it, because it's very easy to get caught up in switching from character to character because you want to talk about all these different aspects of something. And Brian McClellan did a good job of finding the right points and the right characters in which to make those switches. And you can over and underdo that so easily. And
keep talking.
So I liked that he chose characters that were just related enough to move it to where he wanted, so that it was a new little mini arc in and of itself, these little mini sections within the chapters, but it wasn't just like stop, new, and moving on, unless it was a chapter, and the chapters even then had a decent flow to them. So I agree with V.S. Drake that he did a good job of that, and I did enjoy that aspect of it. I did enjoy certain people's segments more than others, for sure. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I'm not a huge fan normally of multiple perspectives in a book. Um, Game of Thrones is a good example of this, where I just don't like the hopping around, where you get a little bit of this story and then you move around and you get a little bit of this story and then you move around and you get a third story. And that's not something I particularly enjoy in novels, but I think it was well done in this particular book. I didn't feel a lot of cliffhangers. I felt like every story chunk was, or arc, I should say, was complete. So it wasn't like, and then the bad guy barged in and we don't know what's going to happen next. Meanwhile, so that was cool.
yeah, and it looks like in our chat, thanks again, Outback Fan, for sharing your stance on the drug use correlations. The idea that there are positives to drug use, like, I mean, it's kind of how drugs work in our real life, but it is an uncomfortable thing to think of it that way because ultimately they are destructive. And maybe they didn't do as good a job of showing how destructive they can be, like you mentioned, Adam. But back to our topic on the moving perspectives. Yeah, uh, there are some Brando Sando vibes there going on. The idea that you can shift these perspectives and let the story move through your characters. I think Brian McClellan probably had some influences there. I mean, and obviously Brandon Sanderson enjoyed it, according to the cover of the book.
Yep. Let's talk characters. Who is your favorite character?
I'm actually going to have to copy Stormreed. Couple was probably my favorite, specifically, and for the same reason. So I'm glad somebody else got the same thing I did. Couple was such a cool character. She was so expressive, but didn't have a line of dialogue. And I thought that was really cool and really well done.
Yeah.
She's got a lot of potential as a character to grow as well. I like that she kind of took that protective stance just innately, like, and didn't seek to glorify that she was doing it either. Like, Taniel didn't realize until like what, the last quarter of the book, that he was being protected by her the entire time.
Yeah. I think it was about halfway that, yeah, right when he went up the mountain. And
so yeah, last third maybe, but yeah.
Definitely it was kind of funny how he treats her like this fragile thing for most of the book, and then at the end she's like, "No, man, I'm a badass. Like, knock it off." My favorite character, I kind of already mentioned, Tamis. I felt was very relatable, and he was pretty cool. I definitely liked Paul as well. I was interested in her story a lot, especially her backstory. I liked at the beginning how they made it clear that she was not a romantic interest for Taniel, but then kind of at the end she kind of became one. So it's kind of a little weird there, but
I don't know. There was some back and forth there throughout, and I could take or leave that aspect, but that seems to be more happening to her than coming from her.
definitely.
Which I'm totally okay. I'm totally okay with that being the case as long as it doesn't feel forced down the road. But my
I
other favorite character. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You have
I
more
would
on
yeah,
this.
I would almost say like she is a love interest, but not necessarily romantic love. Like, because Taniel saved her when her during her backstory when her village was being attacked, and he protected her then and didn't let bad things happen to her. She shows more of a familial love towards him.
Yeah, and that I think there's a difference between love interest and having having love between characters. And I actually really enjoy that platonic love between characters, which I would love to see that fostered. Um, because it doesn't have to be romantic to be something powerful in the story. And I like that that's so far how that's manifested. But uh, Storm Reed, how about the laundry girl plotting to kill Tamis, but keeping the bodyguard safe? Again, that's she's a pretty cool little like side quest character, you know, who has some pretty interesting parts and very much that unexpected uh strength in a character that like strength coming from a character that's in an unexpected role, I guess, in society.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of cool because obviously during such rebellious times you're going to get those people who are like, I totally don't agree with this, and even though I'm just a laundry lady, like I'm going to do something about it. So she was definitely a really cool character.
Yeah, and I agree with Vias Drake. I didn't always like what she did, and she was manipulated to some extent, but like it was kind of cool to see like just a normal-ish character in there doing like showing real courage, even if it was for reasons that I wouldn't agree with.
Yeah.
And I think my other favorite character that like honestly really liked reading Adamet's character. Like he was very much a uh I don't know, he felt like the most down to earth person in the entire book. And it was kind of nice like going from like all these crazy situations, and he was in some crazy situations, but he was the most level-headed. Kind of it felt like every time I went back to Adamat, I got to center myself a little bit within the
Yeah.
book, and that was kind of nice.
Yeah. I so there were definitely a lot of things about this book where I was like, I would really enjoy another story about this specific thing. One of them was I want a book from Adamat's past. I want to hear a story about him being a detective and solving crime, he was a very cool character.
Yeah, that'd be pretty awesome. Like I enjoyed those little snippets from his past where he's just like bringing him up. I mean, I get that he's got the knack and the eidetic memory, uh, but like, and that's all it would have to be is just like him kind of daydreaming about his past, and we get to see some of these little adventures.
Yeah.
You know, uh,
So not to cut tonight short, but let's get into Endgame
all
to
right.
keep things flowing. So this is the end of the conversation. But what were your final thoughts of the book?
I am glad that we got to learn Kresimir promise, and that wasn't dragged out for freaking ever. It feels like, even though this felt like the second book, it felt like in the second book that was made for like another 5, because it feels like this was the prologue to something that's much, much bigger. And I enjoyed the book. There were parts of it that were a little bit more difficult for me to get through, um, just because I think it was honestly because I was tired. I had some elements of struggling to read through some of the more exposition-y parts that weren't related to the magic system because they felt a little forced to me. Again, maybe that was just the headspace I was in when I was reading through them.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it was worthwhile. It's a good book. It's on the longer end for what we do. I would recommend it to those who like high fantasy, who want to try out kind of a different setting. Just be warned that I think this book takes a lot of elements from our world and just expects you to fold them into this one automatically in order to accept what that world is, rather than building it himself. And if you're willing to do that portion of it, it can read as a very good book. But if you want the world completely built for you, i.e., Brandon Sanderson style, that's not what this book is. and it's probably going to come off a little frustrating.
Yeah. I will say this about the book. It definitely grows on you. I think really it was an audiobook problem for me to get into it at the beginning, but the beginning was a lot of information thrown at you, and like I said earlier, it felt like book 2 and the author expected you to have read book 1 already. But honestly, as soon as I got a hold of what was going on and all the dynamics to the characters and the magic system and all that, uh, I really started getting into it, and I really started to enjoy the book. That ending where Daniel shoots the god and kills him, and you just like left there thinking, okay, obviously he's not dead. I mean, he's shot less powerful people before and they haven't died. So what's gonna happen? Like it was a very good way to finalize the story, but make you want more. I definitely I won't jump into book 2 now, but I definitely will pick it up later, and that's only because these are pretty big books, so gotta have the time.
And I think it'll be fun to see more of the gods as well, because I feel like it's not going to stop with just Adam and Kresimir. Like I have a feeling that eventually we're going to get into all the 9, and that's going to be fun. So I'm with you. I'm going to pick it up eventually, maybe when I've got a little bit more time.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was pretty fun. I'm glad that we had an active chat today. That made it extra fun to read this book, getting to come here and share it with all of you people. Looks like Alpac Fam says their opinion is that it's a fairly generic story with some sort of interesting magic. They have no intention of continuing the series, and totally understand it's not for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I am curious about expanding the world. I hope we see more of that in following books. We know there are other countries and they have their own motives, but I want to explore what those motives are. Mm-hmm. I think there's room for expansion for the next books. This book does land on a would recommend, but that beginning though just kind of makes it hard.
Yeah, well, I agree for the most part. I would recommend it, but you have to be patient with this book. And if you're, there are some generic parts like Alpac Phantom said, and it's not going to be for some people, and that's fine. I would recommend it, but it's not going to be at the top of my recommendation list either. So,
yeah. All right, let's talk about next up. So we already know Artemis Fowl is our next book to read. Read that by April 24. And the verdict of the vote tonight, drum roll please. All right, and Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Read by May 8. So yes, thank you everybody who voted. I'm really excited to read an Agatha Christie book, especially after Truly Devious suggested that we read Agatha Christie. So it'll be really cool to check out another mystery novel of some sort. So yeah, Artemis Fowl, and I've read that before when I was a kid. I'm really excited to return to that too. So
yeah, that's one of my favorite books as a kid. So I'm looking forward to actually discussing it. I think we each probably read it separately and never discussed it, so it'll be fun to reread it, discuss it with you. Yeah, and I'm also looking forward to And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I have read at least one of her other works. I think, actually, technically, I read 3 because it was a part of a collection. But so I don't think, And Then There Were None was not one of them. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And Storm Reed had a good phrase for what the Promise of Blood is. It's a good vacation read.
Yeah.
Just engaging enough, but not so engaging that you can't put it down and do other things.
Yeah. With that, give you some more plugs here. Hit us up on our main page, dmstable.com. That's where you find every single possible information about us, our podcast, Roll with Advantage, the 800's information, some cool stories from blogs, stuff like that. Hit us up on our socials as well, Twitter and Facebook. Facebook is at the DM's Table. Twitter is at DM's Table. And if you want to chat with us on a more regular basis, we have a Discord channel. Hit us up on Twitter or Facebook and we'll get you that link. We talk about books. We have the bookshelf chat as well as other nerdy topics, D&D and everything nerdy. So hit us up and we'll have some good conversations. And if you want to have a say about what we read next, we're continuing our Anyone Gets a Vote trend for the rest of this month, I believe. And then it'll be back to $2, get you a vote, and us staying on the air and all that stuff. So check out our Patreon. And then finally, we have our YouTube channel where all of our videos of the 800s as well as our podcast and all sorts of other things are. So check those out. All those links are down below the video, Patreon, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. So check those out. Alex, you want to talk about some themes and things?
All right. So as we've already said, we have April done. That's back to the original formula. Anything 800's April. So we already have that with Artemis Fowl. And moving into May, that is, as we have said in chat, our Bring a Friend month, as well as the voting for this month will be for May's books, and that is open to everybody, as Adam said. So please tell us what to do or tell us what to read. And then bring a friend who will like the books that you suggested and voted on, or get them in early and they can help vote on our next book for May as well. Also through May, we will be promoting the Mental Health Awareness Month. We'll be providing a little bit more information on a cause that we support, specifically Jasper's Game Day. If you want to go check them out on Twitter and Facebook, get to know a little bit more about their mission statement, which is to bring awareness to mental health issues through tabletop and RPG gaming, and they hold events and all sorts of other things, and we'll get you some more specific information through May on that. And lastly, moving into June, that will be an Asian Authors Month. So all Asian and Pacific Islander authors. So if you have any authors that you want to suggest to us or any books like that, please hit us up, give us suggestions. We'd love to hear from them.
Yeah, one of the things that all three of us have said that we love about the 800s is it's given us exposure to books we've never would have thought to read. So that doesn't happen without your guys' suggestions, so bring them on forward.
Yeah, and we absolutely love the idea of having other people have their say in what we actually read. So again, can't stress this enough. Vote.
With that, Storm, thank you for your endorsement for our format for book club here. And thank you everybody else for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you everybody. It's been awesome. I even when we disagree, I really enjoyed the chat, getting to go back and forth and exchange ideas. It's been amazing. So I guess with that, we will see you next book.
Yes. See you guys later.